It's election week for ASUOP here at Pacific, and we brought in 4 candidates to speak about their campaigns.
You guys, Reese, you had mentioned your platform. And for those who are watching and don't know, their platform is your advocates for outreach, accountability, and student independence. And what would some of your guys' goals be to achieve those things in your platform?
Sure, I can talk about, well, I'll talk about all of it, but something that's really important to me is accountability and transparency within ASUOP. I was previously a senator for the Conservatory of Music, and in my time there, I wrote some legislation that made all of the Senate's work public, and it was a big transparency bill, and that's what, at least in theory, is supposed to have let students have access to what ASUOP does and keep them informed. Um, And the same thing with my attorney general position now is I keep ASUOP accountable. I make sure everybody within ASUOP is following all the rules, and I make sure that basically everything gets done right within our organization. So that's something that's really important to me and something I would bring to the presidential role. Is just making sure that ASUOP is accountable and it's there for students so students can take a look at everything we're doing and even hold us accountable just with all the extra eyes that are on us. Um, and then for outreach, I'm really, really excited to work with more and more people on campus. And then I also want to do a little bit more work expanding ASUOP and UOP's outreach into the Stockton community. Um, I've had like the pleasure of working with Randy and doing some projects on research on what our other peer institutions are doing. And through that, I was able to find a couple ideas we could implement in ASUOP. So one of them was a community outreach committee, which is essentially a group of ASUOP members would go to all our city council meetings, and they would keep an eye out on what's happening in Stockton, and then come back, inform all of our students on what's going on, be open for questions. And that's one of the things I would want to implement in my presidency. Oh, and then lastly, independence or like student independence. This one's just an idea that I want to make sure that all of our leaders within ASUOP and on the UOP campus are independent and strongly ambitious with their goals. I want to make sure that ASUOP is a student organization and it's there to serve students. So we want to be strictly and fiercely fighting for student needs, and I don't want it to be influenced in any other way. We want to hear what the students want, and be there to work on behalf of them.
In terms of my role, what my role would encompass in ASUP, for my part, being kind of more concerned with issues of outreach and visibility, I think for a VP, it is kind of essential for them to, put the senators in a state of mind where they are actively pursuing that ambition that's allowing them to write greater legislation that is directly related to the concerns of their, constituents or to the students who reach out to them. I think it is kind of when you have a Senate body that's very focused on, they have like a sort of a focal point that they're all reaching towards, which in our case would be reaching out to the students and making sure that their needs are heard. It might allow them in that case to then kind of pursue personal be a little bit more productive in terms of writing legislation and making sure that they're listening to and actively reaching out to the students and to make sure that whatever legislation they do write is directly reflective of that. Another point that I would like to kind of stress is the issue of visibility. So Reese kind of covered this in all 3 points, but essentially our idea is to make ASUP a little bit more visible on campus. So that's that relates to not just like, oh, we want to make our our presence bigger or our impact larger. More so, we want ASUP to be visible in the sense that students know what's happening, that they're not just confused and curious about this sort of entity that ASUP is, but they don't know what ASUP does and they don't know kind of what's happening and what decisions are on the table, what have been made, what's being discussed. I think that's another thing that's really important, to actually then have students that feel encouraged enough to reach out and ask questions or, relate their concerns to us. So, that's something just kind of add on to what Reese has already mentioned.
So, Arish, for you, I know that this will be your first position with ASUOP, and that's super exciting and would be a huge accomplishment. Um, so, as an outsider, so to speak, what kind of advantages or do you feel like that gives you a different edge going into it?
So that's a great question. I definitely do think that. It's not lost on me that we're all students at the end of the day, that's our primary job, that we've all been students, even though some have been more involved in ASUP than others. I think kind of my thing is that when you've only ever had one perspective, you're hyper focused on that perspective and you understand kind of the, sort of every nook and cranny of that perspective. So if I've only ever had a student perspective, whereas, sort of my Reese, for example, and our the other members running, they've also had sort of that inner perspective. So they understand the structure and they understand kind of the limits and maybe what's possible and what isn't. But I've only ever known sort of where ASUP falls short in reaching out to students, because that's been my personal concern ever since I was a freshman. Is, while I'm very aware of ASUP in terms of the fact that they have a table out there sometimes, and they encourage events and their label is on different events, but I don't know what they do. And I don't know how wide their impact is and how, in what sorts of things are they further involved in. Can I reach out to them? Can I go to ASUP and be like, so what's happening? Are you willing to discuss anything with me? Can I, tell you about my concerns within the community and, Pacific community? And would you be able to do anything? I think those are concerns that I wasn't alone in having, that I'm not alone, that I think a lot of students who've reached out to me since I, we began the campaign, who've been like, well, why isn't there a central place for all this information? Like, why do I have to go to different social media and outdated websites to try to find what's happening? So I think that's been a perspective that I've had, just being, sort of that outsider, as you said. And I think it is important because that allows us to not just get lost in sort of the internal structure of ASUP and only focus on, well, this is what we're doing, and people lose a little bit of concern with, that student side, like what are they thinking? How do they view us? So I think that would be kind of the advantage I would have in, having an outsider's perspective.
I mean, I love your ideas with, getting involved in Stockton because, we all practice, if we're living on campus, we all practically, live in Stockton. It's like our second homes. What inspired your guys's, I guess, like motivation for getting more involved in the Stockton community?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, it's our home. We may think of Pacific as like kind of an insulated place, but really we are surrounded by such a great community that we can take an impact in. Pacific already has such a great program with the community involvement program, but I really want ASUOP to be a leading role in that too. It was just like a gap that I noticed when I was working in ASUOP is that we don't really have any kind of outreach beyond Pacific within ASUOP, which makes sense because it's a student organization, but we really need to be able to keep our students informed on where they're living and what's going on. So I think it's incredibly important that ASUOP take a role in that, and just does the work for our students so that way they can feel informed and they can feel just good about where they live and just so they know what's going on.
The idea being that we're not living in a vacuum when we live on campus or when we commute to campus. And that's another thing. I've been a commuter. Like, I've been a student who's only ever driven to campus. So I've never lived there. And there are hundreds of students just like me who live in and around the Stockton community. So in that sense too, it's important for us to kind of reach out into that community and, see where we can get involved and where we can be, so that our students, so that Pacific students aren't just kind of living in this little bubble on campus. We've had students reach out, or at least I've had students reach out to me when I do outreach efforts for like different programs, is what's the community like? Are there like job opportunities available? Where do people hang out outside of campus? And that's been another thing is, so when you have, your student government that's involved in the community, then you can more directly relay that to future students. We're like, oh yes, we have a great presence on the Stockton community in general. It's, so I just think it makes those efforts a lot easier as well. So that's just another point to consider.
I 100% agree. Do you feel that, with the outreach that students who are commuters and who aren't hanging, in Stockton all the time, do you feel like that will bring more of a sense of community? Because I feel like sometimes students that are commuters kind of feel like they're distant from the students who are on campus all the time. Do you feel like that's something that would definitely help with that?
I mean, just to kind of touch back on that, yeah, I've been a commuter, and there's been just several instances where I felt like, I don't fully feel like I'm part of Pacific, and then the way that other students are who live on campus and who kind of have that dorm life, residential life experience. Um, so there's a way where you feel left out, because at the end of the day, it always feels like life happens on campus and not outside of it. So if we could kind of extend that experience in general to, reach out to the surrounding community, into the Stockton community, I think it would just broaden that bubble a little bit. It's going to remain a bubble nonetheless, but, just kind of allow us to see that it's not just on campus, that there are, yeah, so it's definitely a little bit of a reach in some sense, but I think it's really important to focus on the fact that it's not just about campus life, that there's a little bit more out there, especially for students who are living in surrounding communities and surrounding cities who have to drive to campus. So yeah.
I think the whole goal with this is that we form more of a community here with the on-campus living students and with our commuter students. We just want to make sure that everybody on Pacific feels included, and we can have some more Pacific pride here too. But yeah, I really, really love what you said, Arish.
Thank you. So I really only had one other question. I wanted to keep it, kind of short because I know that, you guys are kind of busy, and that way, people who haven't voted could kind of have like a crash course on you guys. So I guess my last question is there anything that you guys would like to say or share for people who haven't voted yet or don't necessarily know how to go about voting?
Yeah, so Arish and I are here. We have a social media presence. Our Instagram is where most of our stuff is. That's Romero Ilias 2021. There you can find all of information about our platform and where to vote. The link is in our description. But just for those who are undecided, just know that me and Arish really want to work on behalf of students. We bring that dynamic there. I've been in ASUOP since my freshman year. I've served as senator. I'm currently an attorney general, and I want to bring all of that knowledge to ASUOP so that way we can bring real tangible change for all of our students.
I think my main thing that I would want students to know is that with what Reese and I are trying to kind of do is to make ASUP a bit more open than it is, so that if we were to kind of get, be elected and get this position, our idea really is to make it accessible to everyone. And I don't see why that can't happen. I think it's totally doable. I think there are several ways we can make that effort where students don't feel like we're just this closed off entity who meet at some place during some time, and maybe they can find some information on social media, but they don't really have the time to make that effort, or don't have the time to kind of do that and come to the meetings. That regardless of all of those kind of hurdles that might be in the way, that we are open and accessible and visible on campus, and that they can come to us, and that they can go on a website and they can find every single thing, every decision that's on the agenda, that's on the table, that's in the air, everything that's being voted on, the different members, the different positions that are available and that might be relevant to different people. Those are things that I would have personally really, really loved over the course of the last 3 years. And those are efforts that I think Reese and I would just seriously be making. So that's something that I would really want people to kind of know about us.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you guys again and for taking time to answer questions. Once again, good luck this week. And for those watching, there is still time to vote. Voters have until the 26th, which is this Friday at 5 p.m. to vote. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
My name is Scout Cooper Wilson. I'm a third-year student and I'm running for president.
And my name is Tiara Smithson. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm running for vice president. And I'm a third-year student.
Have either of you had any previous experience in politics, school politics, or similar positions that you're running for?
Yeah, so for me this year, I'm actually the director of finance for ASUOP, so the treasurer. So I think that that position really like flows well into being president because I have a strong knowledge of the ASUOP budget. And since currently I'm developing the budget for next year, going into being president, I would know exactly kind of what the plan was for ASUOP. Since I have planned where the money is going to go. And this year, I'm also president of my social sorority, Kappa Alpha Theta. So I have some presidential experience as well.
Yeah, and I'm actually a political science major, and so I kind of dabble a little bit in politics with my education. But I'm also the current senator for College of the Pacific, and so I've been able to also kind of gain a lens for ASUOP specifically with the Senate side. And so I'm excited to be running for vice president because vice president kind of like heads the Senate meetings and also meets with a lot of the senators. So I'm excited to like continue work with the Senate next year, hopefully.
Do you have any plans once you're elected? Any goals that you would like to kind of meet once you've been elected? If you're elected, that you'd like to, anything you'd like to start on right away? Any long term?
Yeah, so when we'll first take office in the summer, we'll start by filling out the cabinet because those positions are hired by the president and vice president, and then the Senate is elected. So we'll start out the summer just getting everyone familiar with their positions so that, you know, they're able to do their jobs and make sure that the rest of ASUOP is running the way it's supposed to. And then for some immediate initiatives we want to start is we want to continue developing the diversity, equity, and inclusion department in ASUOP. It was developed or it was started this year. So like, you know, with it being its first year and then also everything being online, it was kind of hard for them to get going and accomplish what they were hoping to. So we really want to focus on that department next year with different aspects of outreach into Pacific and the Stockton community. And then also for kind of like a first 30 days type thing in the fall, once we start, we want to create a lot of events on campus during every weekend for the first month of school, because a lot of students at Pacific, we've heard in the past, have complained that there's not a lot to do on the weekends, and a lot of people are local and like to go home. So we really want to kind of change the campus culture to being more involved and more present on campus, especially on weekends. So we want to create some programming throughout the fall for that.
What do you guys think really sets you apart from the other candidates running for your positions?
Well, so I think just one of the things that I've really just been able to experience this year is actually like the Senate itself. And so I think just like having that knowledge is really powerful, and like having just a familiarity with the position. There's just a lot to say in that. I know the first semester I actually didn't get a lot done that I wanted to, just because like there's a really big transition kind of like learning curve that the whole Senate was experiencing. And so part of that was because we actually had a change in vice presidents like halfway through the semester. And so there was a lot, there wasn't a very stable foundation for us, not to say anything bad about the current administration, just that it kept, there wasn't a lot for us to go off of. It was a lot of learning. And so I've done a lot of that learning. And so I'm excited to hopefully transition the Senate sooner so that we can actually start working on things and also be able to answer questions. So I think that's one of the things that I'm just most proud of going into this position is that I've had the experience that I think prepares me for it.
Yeah, definitely with ASUOP, the term length is only a year, which is a very short amount of time compared to other, political institutions. And so I think that what really sets us apart is that we have this experience. So Tiara as vice president would be head of the Senate and she has all the Senate experience. I would be head of cabinet and I have cabinet experience through director of finance. And throughout this year, I've worked on several projects that were kind of external to my like scope in that position. So I've done a lot of work that maybe other directors of finances wouldn't have done in the past. And so with that, I think we just both feel really prepared to get started and to, yeah, be able to really make the most of our entire year without having to spend a lot of time simply learning how to do our positions and what ASUOP is all about.
One last question. So voting, I believe, ends this Friday, correct? So for the people who will be watching who aren't too familiar with how the voting process will go this year, would you be able to tell them, where they can go to fill out the ballots or to send things in, things like that?
Yeah, the ballot is online on TigerLink. On Monday, they sent out an email from Pacific Plus linking to that, so people could look back for that. We also have the link to the ballot linked in our campaign Instagram account, which is at Scout and Tierra 4, with the number 4, ASUOP. And so just click the link, it's really easy. From there, you're able to read the candidate's platform and also watch the debate that happened a few weeks ago. So if people want more information before they cast their vote, that's available at the ballot, but then just filling out the ballot itself probably takes less than 5 minutes.
All right, perfect. All right, yeah, that should be it. Thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thanks, Jordan. Nice to meet
No
you.
problem. Nice to meet you.
Remember, voting ends Friday the 26th at 5 p.m. For a more extensive list of candidates and information, go to the ASUOP government Instagram page.